Okay, so Apple's about to release a monitor that costs $1,600 minimum, and it might actually make your Netflix shows look worse than the current one. Like, not theoretically worse, actually worse, and honestly. The internet's having a complete meltdown about it, but for kinda the wrong reasons. So let me break down what's actually happening here, because this whole situation is wild. What's up, guys? So if you've been waiting, like patiently waiting, for years for Apple to update the Studio Display, I've got news. It's happening. Spring 2026. Mark Gurman just confirmed it like 2 days ago. The leaks are everywhere. Model numbers popping up in Chinese databases. The whole thing. But here's where it gets interesting. Everyone's arguing about 90 Hz versus 120 Hz, right? Which, yeah, that matters. But they're completely missing the actual story here. And I think I figured out what's really going on. I spent like the last week going through all the leaks, checking out what competitors are doing, looking at the math, and dude, this whole thing reveals something kinda fascinating about how Apple makes decisions in 2026. So yeah, let's dive in, alright? Let's start with what we actually know, not speculation, just facts. Here's what's confirmed, launching first half of 2026, so like literally could be next week, could be June. Model A3350 showed up in Chinese regulatory filings. Mark Gurman, who's basically never wrong about Apple stuff, says it looks quite similar to the current model, so don't expect a redesign. Same look, different guts. The upgrades are mini LED backlighting, finally, HDR support, and a 19 or a 19 Pro chip, which is a massive jump from the A13 that's in there now. And then the controversial part, the refresh rate. Is it 90 Hz? Is it 120 Hz? So here's what happened. 2 different sources, an anonymous tip to Relay FM back in November, and then a MacRumors source who saw iOS 26 code, both said 90 Hz, but then in December. Macworld found references to 120 Hz promotion in some other build. My take? I think Apple was planning 120 Hz, ran into some kind of problem, we'll get into what, and scaled it back to 90 Hz late in development. The early code probably shows the original plan before they chickened out. Or maybe I'm totally wrong and it's actually 120 Hz and everyone freaks out for nothing. We'll see. Okay, here's where it gets technical for a second, but stick with me because this is actually the most important part. 90 Hz sounds fine, right? It's higher than 60 Hz, smoother scrolling, cool. But there's a problem that nobody's talking about, and it has to do with math. Movies run at 24 frames per second, most YouTube videos. 24, 30, or 60 FPS when you play this stuff on a monitor. The screen needs to show each frame a whole number of times, otherwise things get weird. Here's how it works. 60 Hz monitor showing 24 FPS content, each frame shows 2.5 times, works with something called 322 pull down. 120 Hz monitor, each frame shows exactly 5 times. Perfect, no issues. 90 Hz monitor, each frame shows 3.75 times. You can't show a frame 3.75 times, like physically impossible. So what happens? The timing gets uneven, frame pacing issues, judder during slow camera pans in movies, stuttering, and this isn't me making stuff up, this is just how displays work. A $300 budget monitor doesn't have this problem because they stick to 60 Hz or 120 Hz. Apple is literally creating a problem that doesn't need to exist, but, and this is important, most people won't notice, like honestly. If you're scrolling Safari, editing photos in Lightroom, cutting video in Final Cut, 90 Hz is gonna feel smooth. The judder only shows up in specific scenarios with 24 FPS content and slow motion, so it's not a deal breaker for everyone, but the fact that Apple is willing to make this compromise, that tells you something about their priorities, and I don't love it. So why would they do this? Why choose 90 Hz when 120 Hz is clearly better? The rumor is bandwidth, and okay, on the surface that makes sense. But let me explain why I think there's more to the story. Thunderbolt 5 has 120 gigabits per second of bandwidth. That's a lot. At 5000 resolution and 120 Hz, you're using most of that just for the video signal, but not all of it. Here's the thing though. The Studio Display isn't just a monitor. It's a Thunderbolt hub, 3 USB-C ports, Ethernet, it charges your MacBook, it's got speakers, a webcam, the whole deal. At 120 Hz, apparently all that extra stuff starts competing for bandwidth. At 90 Hz, Apple keeps like 20-25 of the bandwidth free for USB drives, Ethernet traffic, charging, whatever. And this is where I get frustrated, because who is this for? Like genuinely, who is the person that has 3 external SSDs plugged into their monitor, running gigabit Ethernet, charging a MacBook at full speed, all at the same time? That's such a specific edge case. Most people, and I mean like 95% of people, use the Studio Display as a single cable solution, maybe one external drive, that's it. Apple is crippling the main function of the product for theoretical bandwidth anxiety. You know what would fix this? 2 Thunderbolt ports or a toggle in settings, performance mode at 120Hz with limited USB, or hub mode at 90Hz with full bandwidth. Let users choose. But nah, Apple's gonna Apple. Okay, quick history lesson. Because I feel like everyone's forgotten how rough the original Studio Display launch was. March 2022, Apple drops this thing, $1,600, and within weeks, people start noticing problems. Problem 1, the webcam was terrible, like shockingly bad. Joanna Stern from the Wall Street Journal said it looked like BlackBerry. Quality. People ranked it worse than the 2-megapixel camera in the MacBook Pro, a 12-megapixel camera producing worse image quality than cameras from 2015. Apple blamed software, said they'd fix it. The fix came, it was slightly better, still not good. Problem 2, the speakers would just stop working, totally random. You'd be listening to music and 5 seconds later, silence, the only fix. Crawl under your desk and unplug the power cable, because Apple, in their infinite wisdom, didn't put a power button on a $1,600 monitor. Yeah, you had to physically unplug it to restart it. In 2022, problem 3, firmware updates would fail. You'd try to update the display, and it would just not work. Error messages. Contact Apple support. Some people had to bring their monitors to the Apple Store just to get a software update installed. Problem 4, USB hub freezes. Connect some USB devices, transfer files for a few hours, and boom, the whole hub locks up. Can't switch audio to the speakers, can't use the webcam, can't even open the display settings, unplug, replug. Repeat, all of these problems trace back to one decision. Putting iOS on a monitor. The Studio Display runs iOS, powered by an A13 chip. It's basically an iPhone 11 without a touchscreen, controlling your display. And here's what scares me about the Studio Display 2 with the A19 chip. What happens in 5 years when iOS 31 drops support for the A19? Will your monitor lose features? Will it stop getting security updates? Like, imagine your $1,600 monitor becoming a security risk because Apple won't update the software anymore. That's kinda dystopian, right? Here's the part Apple doesn't want you to know. They don't have a monopoly anymore. For years, if you wanted 5000 at 27 inches, you had 2 choices. Studio Display or the LG Ultrafine, which was basically designed by Apple anyway. No real competition. That's over. BenQ just dropped the PD2730S 5000 Thunderbolt 4. 98% DCI-P3 color, factory calibrated, height adjustable stand included, not a $400 add-on. Price? $1,200. That's $400 less than Apple. ASUS ProArt PA27JCV $799. 5000, color accurate, not quite as bright, but it's half the price. And then at CES 2026, like literally last month, companies were showing off 5000 displays with 165Hz refresh rates, 180Hz. Mini LED with over 2000 dimming zones. Dual mode support where you can drop to 144p at 330Hz for gaming. Apple's about to release a monitor with 90Hz maybe and act like it's groundbreaking. Meanwhile, LG and ASUS and Dell are shipping displays that completely embarrass it. Oh, and Dell has a 52-inch 6000 display at 120Hz for under $3,000. That's massive screen real estate, high arrays, full 120Hz. And it costs less than buying 2 studio displays. The game has changed. Apple just hasn't noticed yet. Alright, let's get practical. Should you wait for the Studio Display 2? Or look at competitors? Wait for it if you're deep in the Apple ecosystem and value seamless integration. You specifically want that glossy display because all the competitors use matte. You need the all-in-one webcam, speakers. Single cable setup. You care about industrial design because nothing looks quite like an Apple product and you're cool with paying the Apple tax. Look elsewhere if you need it now because spring 2026 could mean June. You want higher refresh rates because competitors already do 120Hz and beyond. You care about value. Like at all. You need actual flexibility without paying $400 for a height adjustable stand, or you hate glossy screens. My honest take. If you're a creative professional, like you live in Final Cut, Logic Pro, the whole Mac workflow, the Studio Display 2 is probably worth it. The color accuracy, the integration, single cable, it matters when you're working 10-hour days. But if you're a more general user, someone who uses their Mac for coding, browsing, light creative work, I'd seriously look at that BenQ or wait and see what else launches this spring because competition is fierce right now. Let's talk money. Current Studio Display, $1,599 with mini LED, HDR promotion-ish and then a 19 chip. Where do they price this? Option 1, keep it at $1,599, unlikely. But if competition gets brutal, maybe Apple eats the cost to stay competitive. Option 2, $1,799 to $1,899. More realistic, a 200300 bump for significant upgrades, still way cheaper than the $5,000 Pro Display XDR. So they can frame it as the affordable Pro option. Option 3, 32-inch model. There are rumors about a larger size, if that happens. $2,299 to $2,499 easy, which is uncomfortably close to Pro Display XDR territory. But hey, Apple's gonna Apple, the cynical reality. Apple knows they can charge whatever they want. Ecosystem lock-in is real. If you own a Mac Studio, what else are you gonna buy? A Dell? An ASUS? You could, but then you lose True Tone, you lose seamless color management, you lose that perfect wake from sleep experience, and Apple knows this. That's their whole strategy. They're not competing on specs anymore. They're competing on integration. You wanna know my dream studio display too? Here it is, 2 models, 27-inch at $1,299, undercut the current pricing, 32-inch at $1,899. Fill the gap to Pro Display XDR, true 120Hz promotion. No compromises, no 90Hz nonsense. User modes in settings, performance mode 120Hz, limited USB bandwidth, hub mode 90Hz, full Thunderbolt 5 for all your peripherals. Let me choose based on what I need that day. Include the height adjustable stand. Seriously. Charging $400 extra in 2026 is just come on. Give us a power button, it's not that hard. Better webcam, use the iPhone 17 camera sensor, not iPhone 11 tech from 2019, and commit to 5 years of software support. Put it in writing, so we know this isn't planned obsolescence. Will any of this happen? Probably not, but I can dream. Look, the Studio Display 2 will sell. Of course it will. Apple could put an Apple logo on a potato and it would sell. But the fact that we're sitting here in 2026 debating whether it's 90 Hz or 120 Hz, that alone tells you how far behind Apple has fallen in this category. 4 years is forever in tech. The original Studio Display launched before the M2 chip, before Apple Vision Pro, before ChatGPT, and in all that time, Apple did basically nothing with this product. Now they're rushing out what sounds like a modest refresh, making weird compromises around refresh rates, and they'll probably charge more for it. Meanwhile, companies like BenQ and ASUS are shipping legit innovative displays with better specs at way lower prices. My prediction? Apple announces this thing in March with the M5 MacBooks. It's $1,799. It's 90 Hz, not 120 Hz. The tech press loses their minds for like 48 hours, and then everyone buys it anyway because Apple ecosystem. But I hope I'm wrong. I hope Apple surprises us. I hope it's 120 Hz. I hope they include the good stand. I hope they price it aggressively. Prove me wrong, Apple, please. Alright, that's it. What do you think? Are you waiting for this thing, or are you going third party? Let me know down in the comments. I actually read those. If you found this helpful, hit that like button. Subscribe if you want more coverage when Apple actually launches this. I'll do a full comparison with the BenQ and ASUS options as soon as I can get my hands on one. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video. Peace.